Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. At this time of year, the jewel garden, in fact the whole garden, has shifted. We're almost in another season because all the brightness and the freshness of early summer has now evolved into much richer, deeper colours. The quality of light has changed. So what I try and do at this stage is to fill the gaps with plants that will flower in August and September, and some of them, if we're lucky, on into October. And these are gladioli. I've had these corms for a number of years now. They're good, rich burgundy colours and purples. So just find the gaps and pop them in. Gladioli come from South Africa. They love dry weather with really good drainage, and that's key. Now, coming up on today's programme, Carol immerses herself in a high summer garden, finding plants to keep borders looking beautiful for the rest of the summer.
And aren't these borders a perfect example? Absolutely brimming with colour.
We venture to an ancient woodland in Devon, celebrating veteran trees and their fascinating characters.
Ancient trees are such valuable entities to wildlife, and they are completely irreplaceable.
And we'll be taking a look around RHS Flower Show Tutton Park with Nick and Arid.
What's top of your list? What are you going to find?
Well, there's a new feature this year, actually, about greening up front gardens, so I definitely am going to go and have a look at that. And what about yourself?
The floral marquee always wins for me.
And I will be harvesting my potatoes. Now this is the dry garden, and it has been an incredibly dry year. This has been the driest year I can remember for all the 31 years we've been here at Longmeadow. It's had to cope without any watering other than just the occasional shower of rain that we've had. Now what has worked very well are the Mediterranean plants, of course, the rosemaries and the lavenders, olive, and also I scattered some packets of poppy seeds. It's a good idea when you've got a new border. Just scatter some annuals and see how they fare. And you can see the poppies are growing and this wonderful, intense orange from the Californian poppy, the Escolcia. And one or two gems. For instance, that rich plum colour is absolutely fantastic. Now, we've still got to garden it. It's no good just leaving it. So I'm going to add some plants. But before I plant, I want to do a bit of cutting back and clearing. Now this is Euphorbia coraceus wolfenii, and in spring it has these fantastic flower heads, brilliant electric lime yellow. But now they're over, and next year's flowers will be produced on new growth. When you're pruning back Euphorbia, wear gloves, or at least one glove, because when you cut it, it will exude latex, and that can harm your skin. Now you can see, as I'm taking out the old growth, that the new growth is apparent, and these are next year's flowering stems. So I don't want to cut these back. That's the cutting back. Now this is Agastaki, or some people will pronounce it Agastache. This is a variety called rose mint that I've grown from seed. And you can see it's got this lovely, delicate, slightly pinky hue to its mauve. And having grown them and planted them out into plugs, I can just pop them into gaps. That has added a little bit of elegance to the border, and that will go on flowering for the rest of this summer. Now, the second addition that I'm going to add to the dry garden is this Gara. In fact, it's been reclassified as an Onothera. That's the same as evening primrose. Again, like the Agastaki, they're very easy to grow from seed. I've started to grow many more perennials from seed, and it's really rewarding. For a start, it obviously saves money, but it's more than that because it gives you quantity, so you can start to change the way you plant. You can have real drifts running through a border rather than ones and twos. And the third thing, which particularly applies to plants like this Gaura, is if you have heavy soil or live somewhere where it's very wet or cold in winter, there's a high chance that they won't survive. So that's an expensive luxury, whereas if you've grown them from seed and you lose some or all of them, you just grow some more. So there are lots and lots of good reasons to grow perennials from seed, even if it means being a bit patient and waiting for a few years for them to reach their maturity. I will work my way through both sides of the dry garden, adding in these plants. And the point is, this will rejuvenate it and refresh it and give us floral interest well into October. The beauty of this garden is it does stay looking good for a long time. Now, we have been celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And to mark each of the decades of her 70-year reign, we've been visiting 7 people who are passionate about trees. And this week, we're going to Devon to marvel at ancient and veteran trees.
I am in awe of ancient trees. When I stand next to an ancient tree and touch it, I can almost feel the history that it's gone through. Thinking of the stories that they could tell you if they could speak. You know, where did they get that tear from? How did the bark get damaged? I'm Cheryl Duerden, and I'm a forester and an ancient and veteran tree surveyor. I think it's the sense of discovery, finding an ancient tree, stumbling upon a historic being that's lived for centuries. I grew up in Singapore, and having experienced tropical rainforests all my life, it's a really stark contrast to what it is here. Ancient woodlands are essentially woodlands that have been around since the 1600s. We get lots of indicator species telling us that they're ancient woodlands. Some examples that you may see are bluebells, primroses, got wood anemone, lots of different ferns, dog's mercury, red campion, all sorts of species come through. So part of what I do is to record the different characteristics of the tree. On this tree, you've got lots of mosses, lots of lichens as well growing on it. If you look into the center of the tree, it's got an amazing hollow, lots of ivy growing on it. We've got some ferns as well. Ancient and veteran trees have got such unique features. So I add all this information to a database called the Ancient Tree Inventory, which helps map all of the ancient, veteran and notable trees in the UK for us to better protect these trees. Ash tends to live for about 350 years, if not more. This particular ash is quite large for its species, and combined with all the different features that you can see, the hollowing, the trunk, the tears and cavities, we think that this stem alone is probably about 200 years old, if not more. The older a woodland is, the more wildlife it can support. Lots of animals in the woods depend on dead and decaying matter. For an ancient ash like that, it supports up to 1,000 different species of wildlife. You get lots of insects, you get beetles, you get all sorts of spiders as well that live in it. There are lots of birds that use ancient trees as habitats. We get owls and kestrels that nest in them. Bats as well love roosting in nooks and crannies. Ancient trees are such valuable entities to wildlife, and they are completely irreplaceable. So I really do believe that we've got the responsibility of protecting them for the future, making sure that they live for as long as possible. Being able to work with these trees is just like being able to share a little bit of that history that it's witnessed through time. And I think that's really special because you get to be there with a living creature that's seen everything that's happened before our time, and that's truly remarkable.
I often think, when looking at a gnarled ancient tree, not just what they've seen of our world, but what they've shared and communicated, the way that trees talk to each other via their roots and by fungal interaction about nutrition and pests and predators. That is completely fascinating. If you, like me, planted a tree as part of the Jubilee celebrations of the Queen's canopy, it does need attending to and looking after. This is a fastigious birch that I planted. Doesn't matter what kind of tree you plant, first year, water it once a week. Now, if, when you planted it, you mulched it thickly, it's a good idea to scrape the mulch away, water it, and then put the mulch back on. And if you haven't mulched it, it's not too late. So it doesn't have to be good compost. It can either be fairly rough compost, bark chippings, even grass mowings will do the job. Any organic matter with a nice thick layer. And what the mulch does is three things. It stops evaporation, so it keeps the moisture at the roots, is where it's going to be most effective. It suppresses weeds and other growth which are going to compete for moisture and nutrition, and also reduces compaction. And the last is really important because compaction, which can be caused by rainfall as well as feet, will inhibit root growth. So a nice thick mulch and the tree will grow a lot faster. The roses have been good this year, but its season is coming to an end. That's because I grow mainly old roses, which are once flowering. And by deadheading, you can prolong that flowering, but it inevitably comes to an end round about the end of July. But we're now shifting into another display that isn't dependent upon the roses here in the cottage garden. So what we have to do, as with elsewhere, is to do a bit of cutting back and a bit of planting. The foxgloves, which have been magnificent, still have these fantastic sculptural presences, but each one of these is a seed head, and each seed head has scores, if not hundreds of seeds, so there can literally be tens of thousands of seeds in one foxglove. So if you don't want those to spread in your borders, then you need to cut them back before the seeds ripen. And if you don't like the sculptural quality of them, which I do by and large, you also need to cut them back because this won't flower again. I've got some Nepeta down here that I want to cut back. Nepeta is a Mediterranean perennial. In other words, it likes hot, baking conditions, as much sun as you can give it, and critically, good drainage. Now, I can't give Nepeta its ideal conditions. This soil is too rich. It responds by growing enormously, vigorously, and then flops. Can't sustain. Now, if I cut back here, take away the growth that happened earlier in the year, that lets light and air in so the new growth can come back. And that's the great thing about perennials. Unlike the biennials, they will grow back when you cut them back and very often flower again. And perhaps more importantly, can create room in which to plant something else, which will carry me through into autumn. Now, I've always felt that the RHS Flower Show Tatton Park is really the signaler of this new season. There's a new set of plants, a new palette of colours. And it's now time to go and join Nick and Arit as they explore what Tatton has to offer us this year.
It's the biggest horticultural event in the north, and as ever, the show is full of creative ideas to transform your garden, whatever the size.
It's also packed with spectacular plants and flowers as growers come together to show off their best blooms in what is truly a kaleidoscope of high summer colour. Hey, Arit. It is unbelievably toasty. I should have worn the same outfit as you.
I think you should have, but I'm going to say it's still hot. I've resigned myself to being hot, but we've still got loads to see.
Exactly. So what's top of your list? What are you going to find?
Well, there's a new feature this year, actually, about greening up front gardens, so I definitely am going to go and have a look at that. And what about yourself?
Well, as ever, I am so tempted to go and dig around all the show gardens, but the floral marquee always wins for me. There's just so many fantastic stands, so many fabulous plants, so many brilliant people. So, yeah, I think I'm going to do that.
You're going to be in the shade, I know you.
I am. I am.
This year, the show is putting a greater emphasis on sustainability. And the greener front gardens have some brilliant ideas to make best use of what's often an overlooked or slightly uninspiring space. Our smaller front gardens are often the poor relation to our bigger, glamorous back gardens, but it doesn't have to be this way. These designs balance clever planting with practical needs to create gardens that the whole street can enjoy. Imagine walking out into this front garden, designed by Lynn Caudle. Now, she has left a small space, for a car, but it's her sensitive choice of materials that I really like, because the clay pavers and the gravel are permeable, and that means that the water will seep into the ground and not run off into the drains, which is so important. The colour palette is joyful. It's really tight, and that's because she's used blue and yellow, which sit on the opposite side of the colour wheel. The coreopsis and the eryngium, I can see a perovskia over there, and it's covered in bees. And I really like this living green wall of ivy. It's going to really help with the cooling effects in the garden and provide a late source of nectar for pollinators. This front garden is very much car-free and is designed by Christine Lung to celebrate the bicycle. Now take a look at this bike shed. It's absolutely brilliant with this wonderful sedum roof. And this garden really has thought about water management. Take a look over here. That downpipe feeds into a water butt, which then percolates its way through and waters the whole of this bed, which is ingenious. On this side of the garden, it's been planted to be drought tolerant. So we've got lavenders and rosemaries and thymes, making use of the aspects of the garden. This garden, designed by Rachel Bennion, has a sense of peace about it. And I think that's because I am surrounded by plants. Look at all of these agapanthus. This real depth of blue kind of keeps it very simple. And Rachel's used a lot of reclaimed and recycled materials. Do you think this is gravel? No. It's crushed up TV screens that have been reused to give reflection into the space. The reclaimed timber not only looks wonderful, but it's been spaced to allow wildlife to come into this garden. And finally, why not add a seat? That way you can watch the world go by, and with a garden like this, who wouldn't want to stop and have a chat?
The floral marquee is always a riot of joy and colour, but some of the growers here also play a vital role in the preservation of certain plants. I'm talking about those that hold national plant collections. Now, it's a status that's attributed to particular growers who focus on growing a single group of plants, such as this Achillea millefolium. This is just a small selection, in fact only 15 of the 38 Achilleas that sit in the National Collection. They're incredibly long flowering, so they'll go from midsummer up to early autumn. They're also incredibly easy to propagate and grow, so you can split them easily and move them around your garden. Or if you want to try them out for the first time, they're very easy to grow from seed. So if you do a February sowing, they'll be in bloom by the end of summer. These flower structures, which are technically known as corymbs, actually tend to form this sort of flat head, and they're composed of hundreds of tiny little flowers, which means they're brilliant for pollinators to wander around on top of, but also they're absolutely perfect for parasitoid wasps. Now, parasitoid wasps, of course, are those tiny little wasps that help manage some of the problem pests in your garden, like aphids.
The second national collection that's caught my eye is this vibrant display of gladioli.
Now, gladioli tend to get a fairly bad rap, and people think they just need to be lined out on allotments and that's it. But actually, if you grow them in the right way, they're a really worthy border plant. And so these classic kind of Dame Edna type gladioli will produce blooms for 3 or 4 weeks. But if you plant them successionally, in other words, starting in spring, plant some bulbs every few months, then you'll get a real run and succession of plants. The other way as well that you can get long-term gladioli colour is to go for some of the Nanus forms. These are much more dwarfing, and I think they're much more worthy as a border plant. They'll give you a good month of flower or so. What's useful is they'll have this initial flush of blooms, but it's followed by a secondary flush. You can see the buds starting to form there. So I think gladioli really worth introducing into your garden for long-term, spectacular colour.
This national collection of agapanthus also has an exciting new introduction.
Agapanthus hail from southern Africa, and they're part of the Amaryllidaceae family. Now, the bulk of agapanthus are in the sort of blue range or some white, but actually a new one has arrived. Brilliant new cultivar called Poppin' Purple. So you can see those little sort of violet notes in there that make it really special. Now, when it comes to growing agapanthus, they're great in containers, they're great in hot borders, and they're brilliant at taking the extreme heat at this time of year. When it comes to winter, it's worth sort of picking the right plant that's going to be the hardiest in your garden. So the ones that hold on to their leaves, the evergreens over winter, tend to be the most tender. So they'll only take about -5 degrees, whereas the deciduous ones will happily cope down to -15. So it's well worth choosing the right plant for your garden and having a glorious display of brilliant blues and now purple in the height of summer.
What is unique about Tatton is that it's the only RHS flower show that runs a competition specifically for young designers. For those breaking into the industry, it's a great opportunity for them to create their own show garden. But it is a tough contest because there's only 5 coveted plots up for grabs. A few weeks ago, we caught up with one of the successful finalists and the only first timer in the category as she prepared for the show.
My name's Emma Tipping and I'm a gardener at the Grove Hotel in Watford. The design element and putting different combinations planted together is what really got me interested in gardening in the first place. It's really nice to be able to put a few different things together and see them really complement each other, especially as they change throughout the seasons. It's quite satisfying when you see something that works and looks nice in the garden. I was really shocked to find that I was one of the Tatton Park Young Designer Competition, the finalists. So I sort of put the application in thinking that was as far as it was going to go. So yeah, excited, nervous, but looking forward to it. The title of my garden is Come Lime With Me, which is a play on the Guyanese phrase liming. My understanding of it is it kind of means sort of like hanging out, listening to music, eating, drinking. It's like super chilled, and that's the atmosphere that I'd like to try and recreate for the garden at Tatton, really. It's been really cool to design a garden that reflects my Anglo-Guyanese culture. So this is the tropical border in the formal gardens, and I was really inspired in particular by the different shapes and textures of different leaves. There's a nice mix of grasses, some herbs, a few ferns, and some really beautiful ornamental plants as well. One of the more instantly exotic feeling plants in this border is the Trachycarpus palm. I just think it adds instant drama to the border. And it's just a really beautiful leaf. It's currently covered in bees, which is really lovely. And so hopefully I'll be having 2 in my garden at Tatton, just to give it a real sense of height and a real tropical feel. So this is the canal water feature, and in here we've got lots of different types of water lilies. The national flower of Guyana is Victoria amazonica, which is the largest of the water lily family. But they're massive and you can't have them in a British garden. So I wanted to incorporate something on a much smaller scale. So the lilies that are going in my garden are really lovely pale yellow, and they're called Nymphea lemon mist. So I decided to grow a few different bits from seed to take up with me to Tatton. The garden's supposed to be quite a homey feel, so it's quite nice to have some homegrown produce, especially as there's an emphasis on dining and hospitality. I think it's just a really nice thing to be able to share things you've grown from seed yourself. We've got a few different types of chilies. So this one is called Wiri Wiri, and it's a Guyanese chilli. It's a type of habanero chilli, and they're quite small, but they pack a bit of a punch. It'd be nice to get them in the ground at Tatton. I come in and check them every morning when I come into work, just to make sure that they're still okay. So I'll be relieved to get them in amongst all the other plants and ready to show at Tatton. Really, I'm a gardener, so garden design's kind of a new thing for me. So the plants I'm more or less okay with, but the hard landscaping is going to be a new one. So we're at Tatton Park, and it's really exciting to get going. The past few weeks have gone really quickly, actually. And it's feeling quite real now that we're actually on site and started the build. There's 4 planting beds. The blockwork around me is a mix of like water troughs and seating benches. At the very end is one of the planting beds, and then this rectangular bit here is one of the water troughs. Then we've got 3 water troughs on 3 different sides of the garden, a seating bench here and at the top as well, and then the rest will be the limestone paving. The hard landscaping is quite new to me, so didn't really know if it would go to plan, but it's looking really good. It's looking how I had hoped it would. So one of the key colours in my scheme is orange. I just think it's really bright and joyful, gives kind of a tropical feel to the planting. So I have this echinacea here, and this one's called marmalade, and I've got this lovely achillea as well, which is called terracotta. And that sort of changes from yellow to orange as it develops. I've brought up the plants that I've grown from seed at the nursery at work, and got a mix of a few other plants from different suppliers as well. Some of them are looking healthier than others, some of them are looking a bit ropey at the minute. So I'm going to give them a little bit of TLC over the next couple of days and hope that they pick up. I've learned loads already. Still a little bit nervous just because we're not there yet. But yeah, nervous for showtime, but hoping for the best.
Tell that Emma has really enjoyed planting this garden. These 4 deep herbaceous borders, all thread with the colour purple, but it's this one that I'm drawn to with these hot oranges. Love that echinacea winking at me, and the achilleas. And not to forget, she's also grown so many of these plants herself. The amaranthus, the tagetes, I think that's a brilliant effort. Us designers, of course we like big ideas. It would have been lovely to have had a giant Amazon lily here, a bit too large for Tatton. So instead, Emma's put in a smaller lily, lemon mist. And finally, this is a party garden, so there's plenty of space to eat, drink and dance. Emma, you have made it. It's all done.
Still do feel a bit of the nerves, but I'm relieved that it's done. I'm really pleased with it, so I'm happy.
Well, you should be relieved. And you got a silver medal, which for your first garden is brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
I know that you wanted to kind of capture some of the heritage and sort of memories from your family. Do you think you've been able to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I'm really pleased with the planting. I feel like it's quite colourful and bright. I think it's got that tropical feel.
And of course the Trachycarpus, it
Yeah.
made it. They made it.
They're looking pretty cool. I'm pleased with them.
I have to say, I was so impressed that you'd grown so many of your own plants. What advice would you give to those people that want to grow edibles with their ornamentals?
There's a few things in here that I'd never actually tried growing before. So I think really my advice would be just to experiment and grow things that you like to eat. It's always much more fun to be able to eat something you've seen grow from seed, I think.
Yeah.
I think chilies are always a nice one to grow. We've got one in the garden that's just fruited called Hungarian hot wax. It's just quite a nice one that's pretty easy to grow in the UK. It does okay outside generally.
I'm really interested to know if you had any partying going on already in here, because I know that's what you wanted, to get a party atmosphere.
We actually very briefly kind of did yesterday. We had a few drinks in the garden, so it's good fun. Nice to see in action.
So it works?
Yeah, it works.
Sustainability plays a big part in so many of the designs here, and these greener borders show just what can be achieved with really small-scale plantings.
You may remember Jason Williams, who we met at home earlier in the year. He gardens on the balcony of his 18th floor flat, hence being known as the Cloud Gardener. Jason's design shows the potential of what can be achieved with inner city planting.
What you've set up here for Tatton is quite a contrast to your balcony. This is all about terrestrial gardening, right?
That's right. So it's split up into 4 different sections, and one of the sections is a representation of what I see on a day-to-day basis in the city centre, a lot of boring planting. What I've tried to do is show urban developers that, in actual fact, they can add in some colours through some perennials and still have a beautiful border. We have so many people who don't have access to outside space. I think it would be a really, really great idea if these urban landscapers reallocated those borders to the residents so that they could grow their own food.
Looking at this far corner is all about production, I guess, all about edibles.
Yeah, and it's just a way of getting the community together in these urban developments and allowing people to connect to nature through gardening. It's improving biodiversity, increasing wildlife corridors throughout the city, and that, I think, is a really important thing. So hopefully this garden will be that catalyst.
The message at Tatton is clear. No matter how small your space or budget, you can make it count. And there are so many ideas here that you could easily do in your garden. Creating diverse habitats within our gardens is essential. And it can be as easy as this, taking dead stumps of wood, logs, and you can get quite creative. Call it a stumpery if you will. It's a perfect environment for all sorts of insects and invertebrates, such as earwigs and beetles. But what is important is that you don't need to tidy this up in your gardens, because you could attract all sorts of wildlife. You might even find a little toad under there. Leave it alone. Any edible you can grow at home is always going to be a greener choice. You're reducing your food miles and you know exactly where it's come from, and it even tastes better. And here in this border, they've not made a choice of either edible or ornamental. It's all mixed up together. So I've got chilies and lavender, of course, fabulous strawberries, mixed in with the more traditional ornamentals such as roses and dahlias. But if you're really adventurous, you can even eat the petals of those.
From a distance, this reads as a pretty typical garden border. But actually, if you look a little bit more closely, you'll see that everything here is culinary herbs. Now, they make great garden plants. Of course, you can eat them, but they also bring a lot to the border. They flower over a long period, they provide lots of food for pollinators, and their colour can run right the way through the seasons. So how about growing marjoram to sprinkle on your pizza? How about growing some mint to flavour up your new potatoes? Or how about going really wild and growing some of the original marshmallow? You can harvest the roots from this, process it, and turn it into your own homemade marshmallow. Or you could really push the boat out and go for a Szechuan pepper. And this makes a fantastic small garden tree, very easy to look after. The seeds ripen up as you go into the autumn time and release the most delicious, pungent scent across the garden. You can then harvest them, dry them, and use them to bring fabulous flavours to your Chinese dishes. Now, each year at Tatton, one nursery is awarded special recognition by the RHS for going above and beyond the call of duty. And so it's on the high grounds of Cumbria that we find this year's prestigious Master Grower.
I'm Neil Huntley, and we're here at Hartside Nursery Garden up in the North Pennines. We're probably the highest nursery in the country. We're just over 1,000 feet. So we grow really what have to be very hardy plants from all over the world. When it's cold and frosty, it can be really quite cold. About -23 is the coldest we recorded. But the plants we grow here, because of our climate, should actually survive in most people's gardens. Roscoes are one of the things that we've grown all the time that we've had the nursery. We grow around about 100 different named varieties, and they're great because they flower over such a long period. Roscoes can be in flower from the end of May, beginning of June, right through till September, October. So these are the frames where we grow the range of Roscoes that we grow, over 100 varieties. This has to be one of our favourites, which we hope will still have flowers on it for Tatton. This is Roscoe Harvington Raw Silk. Lovely, clean, pale cream colour, strong growing plant. So if you're going to pick out one for easy growing and a good one to start with, that's certainly one to consider. So good garden plants, within 3 or 4 years, you can have a good clump of a dozen or 16 shoots or so. Roscoes are related to ginger, so they're the Zingiberaceae ginger family, but very, very hardy, coming from the Himalayas and China. But they're something which can give that sort of exotic look in the garden, and they can grow in very many different situations, from raised beds, containers, woodland garden, herbaceous borders. There's not many places and many gardens where you couldn't plant them. This is one of the Roscoes we're really proud of. It's one we raised ourselves here, Roscoe Courtleyoides pennine purple. Roscoe Courtleyoides is generally in cultivation known as a pale yellow species. And we've grown this species for many years from seed. And then one year, suddenly amongst all of the yellow seedlings, there was this wonderful purple one, purple with a little bit of a yellow eye, and we've propagated it by division ever since. So it's called Roscoe Courtleyoides pennine purple, after the area here where we are. My father ran an engineering agency business which had been started by my great-great-grandfather, but engineering wasn't going to really see my father to retirement. So we bought the property here 50 years ago this year. I was busy doing my A-levels to go off to university. I was going to do architecture, but didn't actually get the grades of choice to go to the University of Choice. Nearly 50 years later, I'm still here propagating plants and so on. So basically, I'm on a rather extended gap year. It's not just Roscoes that we grow here. In total, we grow probably between 2,500 and 3,000 different things. One of the rarer plants that we grow, and again a sort of personal favourite of mine, is the Weldinia candida, a plant we've grown for many, many years. My father was growing this in raised beds before we even started the nursery. And when I was a kid and not particularly interested in plants, it was still something which fascinated me, with these pure white flowers. You would go out in the morning to almost see how many flowers were open, because this is a plant where the individual flowers only last one day. So yesterday's flowers have now turned to sort of mush on the foliage. Today's flowers are these perfect glistening white 3-petal flowers, and tomorrow's flowers will still be in bud in the middle there. The Roscoes that we're exhibiting at Tatton, they're named in honour of William Roscoe, who was the founder of Liverpool Botanic Gardens and a politician. They were collected and introduced into this country in around about 1806, I think it was. So they've been around a long time, over 200 years. Other plants that we grow, a lot of what we propagate are actually clones of plants. So they're one selected form that somebody has raised. And some examples of that, we have a saxifrage that was raised in 1919. So it's been around for over 100 years, Saxifrage primulae salmon, but it has to be propagated by cuttings to keep it true. So that plant has been propagated for all the generations, cuttings and cuttings, but they're still parts of the original plant that is over 100 years old. One of the challenges of all shows is trying to get things in flower for the show. This year at Tatton, one of the plants that we would like to think is going to be in flower is this rare Panacea from Japan, Panacea foliosa foliosa. We can see the buds set now, and we've still got 2 or 3 weeks to go. It's got wonderful flowers. You almost don't believe that plants can look as delicate as that in the wild, but still perfectly hardy. It's a great honour to be asked to be Master Grower, and I'd like to think it's a recognition of what we've done over the years. It's an opportunity to sort of show off a bit. We happen to not be being judged, so in that sense we've got the opportunity to show things to the public, to interest them in the range of plants we do, without everything having to be wonderfully in flower. We grow plants from literally pretty well all over the world, and you can have the world just in your back garden with a range of plants.
Now, Neil, I am dying to know, did the Panacea make it to the show?
The Panacea has made it to the show. Probably in another day or two the flower will open. We can see the colour, we can see the white, we can see the fringes of the petals, but it's not quite open yet.
Oh,
so I think the heat has probably not helped it.
It's waiting for its window of opportunity. So many of the alpines that you grow and of course exist all over the world are sort of evolved to be shorter and be able to cope with those sort of extreme mountaintop conditions. But actually Roscoias are pretty substantial plants.
Roscoias are almost sort of semi-herbaceous, but yes, during the summer they will get to a reasonable height. But in the winter they're surviving all the challenging, harsh climate that they experience because they're dormant. So tubers will survive under the snow, and then short growing season, many of them won't appear above ground until around at the end of May, beginning of June. And then they will grow rapidly, flower, set seed, and then they're dormant again by the end of October in this country, earlier when they're in their natural environment. But they can provide really quite a lot of flower over a period of weeks, and perfectly hardy plants. So yeah, I think they're well adapted to lots of different situations of garden.
Well, Neil, thank you for sharing this fantastic collection with the show and with everybody else.
Thank you very much.
There are a total of 26 gardens to see here. And this one, the Sow, Grow and Show Garden, is a collaboration between BBC Radio 2 and The One Show, and has been designed by our very own Joe Swift. Joe, I know you wanted to make this a very accessible garden.
Yeah, and it's worked, hasn't it? I mean, look, everyone's here. Hello. Yeah. It was great when people just sort of started coming on and mingling and populating it how I wanted it, you know.
This show garden is pretty much encompassing all of the elements of the whole show, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just trying to get people growing, really. Sowing and growing and into gardening, and so this is a space that I really wanted people to be able to come into and then start looking at the plants and what it feels like to be, you know, completely immersed in a garden space, and that's what sort of triggers people thinking, oh, I could do a bit of that. Containers, edibles, cut flowers.
Which is really great because people want to come here for inspiration, don't they, at the end of the day?
Obviously this is a large garden because I wanted to be able to, for people to really be able to experience it. But you could take a small section of it quite easily, and none of these plants are rare, they're not unusual. You know, most garden centres, nurseries, a lot of them you can grow from seed or from bulbs or corms. So I want it to be as accessible as possible, but just inspire people to have a go.
I think you most certainly have, Mr. Swift.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
And you.
There is so much going on at Tatton this year. I mean, it's just overwhelming. What's been your highlight?
There was one detail on the front gardens where they used a gate to double up for the bike shelter, but also as a front gate, and the material was recycled from the car industry, where you punch out the seatbelt buckles, and it was just brilliant. Just loved the fact, recycled material, great for a small space.
I have to say, for me, it comes down to one plant. So you know agapanthus, that are always just blue or white, or variations of blue, that's about it. They've now got a purple one. It's called Poppin' Purple. Quite small-headed, but with really clear kind of purple-violet flowers. It's gorgeous, and I've got no idea how they've done it.
If I know you, you're going to be on a mission now to find out exactly how that breed has done it.
Absolutely. Well, that's all from us at Tatton. Bye.
Bye.
I've always really enjoyed my visits to Tatton. It's a shame that I can't get there this year, but it's on till Sunday, so if you can get along, do. I thoroughly recommend it. Now, this blasted piece of ground is my potato patch, and I'm hoping that actually underneath the ground it's a lot better than it looks. The tops have all died back simply as a result of drought. I haven't watered this at all. I don't water the beds ever here at Longmeadow, partly to save water and partly because it takes all the spare time we've got to water our pots. But these are second earlies. It's a variety called Charlotte. So you would expect them to be ready by now. By early July, sometime in July, you want to harvest them, clear the ground so you can have another crop. Whereas if you're growing main crop potatoes, they can stay in the ground till October, if need be. So the first thing to do is to be sure that the ones on the surface or exposed at all to light are either kept separate or taken notice of, because what you'll find is where a tuber has been exposed to any light at all, it will develop a green area, and that's poisonous. You can't eat that. Now, if you cut the green area off, the rest is fine. Poison doesn't spread, but just be aware that they do need to be kept protected from light, which is the main reason why we earth them up. It's not just to protect them from frost, it's to make sure that there is a barrier that stops light hitting the tubers. Now, if I dig down like that, we'll start to see what's there. Charlotte are a waxy variety, which I love. So these are actually very nice quality potatoes. It's just the quantity is not up there, but the quality has been preserved perfectly despite lack of water. I'm quite pleased with that, but it certainly marks a shift in seasons. And Carol has visited a garden in Bath, which celebrates this new season in the most glorious fashion.
The summer garden is at its best, with the bees buzzing, the air filled with scent, and vibrant colours shining in the sun. It's a moment to just drink it all in. And there are so many plants that capture that mood, that are wonderful now, but are going to carry on right the way through till the autumn. There are a myriad of plants that will give your borders season-long zing if you choose carefully and know how to treat them just right. And aren't these borders a perfect example? Absolutely brimming with colour. What's more, they have been for weeks and they're going to go on right the way through the summer. Thanks to plants like this beautiful penstemon, blackbird. Penstemons are such marvellous plants. They'll give you this first show of gorgeous flowers, and then if you cut those down, they'll shoot again and go on for months on end. There's a perennial wallflower here, Bowles mauve. It goes on right the way through the year. The whole thing's magical. How wonderful that the sun is shining, especially on this beautiful border. Oh, and the thing that stops you in your tracks immediately is this huge clump of Campanula lactiflora. Lactiflora just means milky bellflower. It's just a glorious plant. The insects love it too. But look what they've done here. These pieces which were protruding right over the steps have been cut back. But they don't look amiss because down here on all the leaf axils, new shoots are going to form and new flowers too. And once these beautiful heads are over, you don't want to chop them when the first one's gone. You want to wait until all these have flowered perfectly, then take your secateurs and go down to the leaf axil below the flowers, chop the stem off, and all those side shoots will give you a secondary display. This is Cirsium rivulari atropurpureum. Now, if you wanted to prolong its life, wait till those flowers have finished altogether, get your secateurs and take it right to the base. That will allow the foliage to come on, and with a bit of luck, you'll get some secondary flowers too. Isn't that just what you want from your plants? A long, long season. Well, some geraniums flower in the summer for a brief period, perhaps a few weeks, maybe a month, but not this one. This is Geranium Patricia, a great tumbling mass of magenta flowers and the perfect complement to the big silvery leaves of this Brunnera. But it's not just a duo, it's a trio. Look at this heuchera, dark, dark leaves at its base, these great arching stems that just spring out of that clump of dark leaves. So clever. With all this vibrant colour around right the way through the summer, occasionally it's nice to have a sort of quiet lull, a little interval. And this border does just that. Because it's all composed of greens and whites at the moment, not only does it look cool and relaxing, but it allows you to really look in detail at the plants that make it up. So, for instance, these lovely hemispherical heads of this hydrangea. This is Arborescens Annabelle. Pale limey green at the moment, eventually becoming pure white. And with it, these lovely allium seed heads. I think they're even more handsome than the flowers themselves. And one of my favourite plants of all time, Solenum Wallicianum. Now a great ferny mass, and later heads of white flowers. And to keep you on your toes, the border ends with this great Eryngium giganteum with these big, sharp, silvery bracts. Well, just to round things off, there's this glorious circular bed at the bottom of the garden. This is a verbascum called Chakesii. This is Chakesii, and this is Chakesii album, the white form of it. It's a perennial verbascum. It'll come year after year, getting bigger and better. And zooming up here and there, these clumps of a lovely pink. It really is a dianthus. It's called Carthusianorum. It's unlike any other pink I can think of. It's got stiff, glaucous stems, and then these little bunches of flowers on the top. And they've all got dark calyces, deep pink buds, and then they open to these pretty fringed flowers. It's a total delight. Really unexpected, really unusual. But throughout the whole garden, there's inspiration to take your garden right the way through the summer and into the autumn.
I love that Geranium Patricia. I added it to the jewel garden a couple of years ago. And along with Anne Folkard, which is also a magenta geranium, they raise the colours of those around them. So all the rich colours of late summer and autumn take a harmony using the magenta as a key. It's wonderful how that works. Now, talking about wonderful how it works, I'm not sure my loofahs are working terribly well. There's not a lot of sign of fruiting yet, but it's actually been quite chilly. Although we've had a couple of very hot weeks, the summer as general hasn't been that warm yet. And I think this is a plant that really needs as much heat as possible. So hopefully there is time yet for them to develop fruits. The cucumbers, on the other hand, are fantastic. They've loved it. And on these 6 plants, we've harvested about a dozen cucumbers. There are about 20 more on there. I would expect to harvest at least 100 fruits from 6 plants. And as long as you keep them warmish and well watered and lots of food, they're very happy. Now, if you're wondering the right time to harvest a cucumber, there's a little tip. Look at the end. Now, if I come over here, for example, this one is still quite pointy at the end. If it's more pointed than round, it's not quite ready. But if it's more round than pointed, like this one here, then that's ready to harvest. Now, this is a variety called Pachysandra. It's small, very convenient, eat them fresh, absolutely delicious. But I actually came into the greenhouse not to do with cucumbers, but with tomatoes. And this is one of the jobs that you might like to do this weekend. If you grow lilies, you will probably have noticed dark brown blobs underneath the leaves. These are the larvae of the lily beetle, wrapped in its own excrement whilst it munches away at the foliage. You can scrape these off, but also you might see the parent, which is bright red on the surface of the leaf. If you manage to remove it, this will break the cycle of eggs and larvae. Delphiniums have finished flowering now and should be cut back. First of all, take off the seed heads and pop them whole into a paper bag, and then the seed can be sown later to raise new plants. Then cut the rest of the plant right back down to the ground. Remove all the material, and it should quickly regrow and throw up new flower heads to flower later in summer. Lavender is thick with bees. Bees, of course, from the hive in the orchard, and they'll make lavender honey. They love it, and so do I. And more than loving it, I'm really pleased with it, because growing lavender here at Longmeadow is surprisingly difficult. Lavender hates to sit in wet soil. And obviously, if you've got heavy clay, it's going to get wet in winter, and it holds the wet. And that's what lavender, and actually rosemary and all the Mediterranean plants hate, but particularly lavender. So what we did when we planted it was dig a trench behind the wall and backfill it with horticultural grit. Then a bit of soil on top of that and plant the little lavender plants. And their roots go down in the grit, and that means they never get too wet. And that's why that lavender hedge is happy and healthy and beautiful. Well, that's it for this week, but we'll be back here at Longmeadow at 8 o'clock next Friday. So until then, bye-bye.
Whether you're attending to an acre or pandering to a pot of pansies, gardening at Longmeadow is the book for you. And stay with us here on 2. We've an eye-opening documentary about the current critical state of the environment, Big Oil versus the World, next.